Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's very nice to be here, to be given this opportunity to say a little bit about who we are. It's friends of the Western Buddhist Order, and I'll say a little bit about the Western Buddhist Order, and I'll say a little bit about my teacher, Lassiter. So I'll start with saying a few words about Lassiter, because it's really him that has given the flavour to this particular Buddhist order and this particular Buddhist movement. So I'll give you a very brief biographical sketch of Lassiter, then I'll say a little bit more about some of his ideas and some of the principles that this particular Buddhist movement is based upon. I've been asked to speak for about 20 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to say everything, but perhaps, I think there'll be a chance for questions. So I'll just try and mention everything, and so if there's anything that particularly interests any of you, you can ask. So as I say, I'll start saying a little bit about Lassiter. He was born in England in 1945 in South London, suburb of London called Tooting, and he was born of sort of working class origins. So he didn't have any Buddhism in his background, so to speak. He had a rather unusual childhood in that at the age of 8 he was diagnosed as having a very severe heart condition, and this meant he was confined to bed. He wasn't allowed out of bed for over 2 years, at which time, evidently, he just took to reading very voraciously. He was a very bright child, and he just read and read and read. He just spent like 2 years of his life laying in bed, reading books. And it was at this time, at the age of 8, that he became interested in Eastern philosophy, not particularly Buddhism at that point. After about 2 years, another doctor actually decided there was nothing wrong with him. He was let out of bed. But when he speaks about this, he says it was a very important part of his life, and he said subsequently that he never felt that he learned anything in his formal education at school, and so he regards himself very much as self-taught. This was during. This was during the war. During the war, he was evacuated to Devon, and he was 14 when he first actually encountered Buddhism, and he encountered Buddhism through the Diamond Sutra, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And he describes in some detail, he's described that as soon as he encountered that sutra, he knew that he was a Buddhist, that he'd always been a Buddhist. This is how he puts it. And from that time on, he regarded himself as a Buddhist, unequivocally as a Buddhist from the age of 14. At that time in England, there was still conscription, and when he became of age, which I think was 17, he was conscripted into the British Army. And by chance, very lucky chance, he was sent to India, and he served as a wireless operator in India for, I'm not quite sure how long, not that long actually, I think it was like 2 years or something. And at the end of that period, he technically actually deserted from the British Army. He was a technical deserter because he hadn't actually been discharged, as I say, luckily he was in India, and he decided that he wanted, this is at the age of, I think he was 17 at this time, he decided that he wanted to go forth in the traditional Buddhist sense, and this is what he did. And he spent the next 2 years wandering around India. He was a very idealistic young man, and he burned all his passports, all his papers, took on a robe, got himself a begging bowl, and started walking around India. So it's an extraordinary thing for an Englishman to do, and I think people didn't really know what to make of him, because, as you probably know, at that time in India, that whole tradition of going for Buddhist monks wandering around begging had died out, and it didn't happen anymore. Anyway, this is what he did with an Indian friend, and he wandered around India looking for a Buddhist teacher, and actually, to start with, he had very little success. He did have some contact. He went to various Hindu teachers, actually, though he very much thought of himself as a Buddhist. He couldn't find any Buddhist teachers. He eventually found someone that would ordain him as a novice monk, and he became ordained as a novice monk. And then a year later, he took full ordination in the Theravadan tradition. So this was his first ordination into Buddhism. And at that time, his teacher, Kashyapa, he studied with this teacher, and this teacher later asked him to settle in a place called Kalimpong, which is up in the north of India. And that's where he settled. And he spent the next 18 years in Kalimpong. And when he was there, his interest was very scholarly. He wrote a number of what are still very well-regarded books on Buddhism. He founded a Vihara. He also founded a Buddhist magazine. And he dedicated his life to trying to teach Buddhism. This is what he wanted to do, and this is what he did. And in that region, there was a lot of nominal Buddhists, Nepalese Buddhists, and he taught them. He also met and became involved with, which became a very important part of his life, with Dr. Ambedkar, which some of you I'm sure have heard of, who was the first Indian law minister, also the man who drafted the Indian Constitution. And Dr. Ambedkar was an untouchable, and he was a fearless campaigner for the rights of untouchability and the rights of the ex-untouchables. And Sangharakshita Bansi, as we called him, became very involved and a friend of Dr. Ambedkar. And eventually Dr. Ambedkar decided he wanted to convert to Buddhism as the only real way of leading his people out of the oppression of the caste system. And it's a long story, but Dr. Ambedkar eventually converted along with many, many thousands of untouchables, and unfortunately died a week after this event. And Sangharakshita became involved very deeply and very much involved for the rest of his time in India, working with the ex-untouchables. And this has a historical ramification for this movement, because although this is a Western Buddhist order, in fact, about a third of the orders are in fact Indians and are nearly exclusively ex-untouchables. And it's actually in India that the Western Buddhist order and the Friends of the Western Buddhist order is most rapidly growing. So that's called the Western Buddhist order. Probably nearly 50% of our activities are now actually in India. Anyway, it was in 1964 that Sangharakshita was invited back to England. He was actually invited to visit England by the London Buddhist Vihara, which was the main Buddhist organisation in England at the time. And I won't go into the details, but he was invited back to try and help heal a schism that had developed within that institution. So he went back to England in '64 to visit, and it was during that time that he actually decided that he wanted to return to England. He decided this because he felt that there wasn't any Buddhist organisation in England at that time that really provided a context for people to actually practice Buddhism. It was mainly a scholastic or monastic phenomena in England at that time, Buddhism. So he went back to India, and a year later he moved back to England permanently, and in 1967 he founded what became known as the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. And a year later, he ordained the first members of the Western Buddhist Order. In 1968, he ordained 12 men and women as members of the order. So that's a very sort of brief history. I should say that during his time in India, when he settled in Kalimpong's up, as I say, in the north of India, and it was a place that a lot of the Tibetans settled after the Chinese invasion of Tibet. They came out of Tibet, and a lot of them settled in Kalimpong. And so he had a number of quite eminent Tibetan teachers. And during this time, he actually took ordination, took the Bodhisattva ordination from one of his Tibetan teachers, and also took on various Tibetan practices. And during this time, he also had a Zen teacher. Now, this is quite an important aspect, because one of the things that from very early on Sangharakshita believed was that in essence all schools of Buddhism were fundamental. There was a fundamental unity within all schools of Buddhism, and this has been very much reflected in his thinking about the Western Buddhist order. And what he decided was that the unifying factor of all Buddhism was what I'm sure you're familiar with the term going for refuge. The idea that individuals commit themselves to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And it's very much this going for refuge, this commitment to the three jewels that Sangharakshita has emphasized within the Western Buddhist order. This has been the central emphasis of this order. There's a little axiom that is quite often used, and which is commitment is primary and lifestyle is secondary. So he wanted to found an order which was non-monastic. He likes to talk about the order as being neither monastic or lay. He felt that the division between monastic Buddhism and lay Buddhism has actually become counterproductive within the Buddhist tradition. And so as people that take ordination within the Western Buddhist order do not consider themselves as monks or laity. They consider themselves simply as Buddhists, people that have made a commitment, lifelong commitment, to the three jewels for going for refuge. And we take what we regard as what's essential, what Bhante is referred to basic. He sometimes calls it basic Buddhism. He emphasizes what he feels is basic in Buddhism. And we take whatever practices that we feel are useful. So the criteria for the practices that we do within this movement, within this order, are not based on any particular tradition, any particular school. They're based on purely pragmatic grounds, that they're useful for individuals in their development. I will say that the two basic meditations we teach at a public level are both from the Theravada tradition and mindfulness of breathing and metta bhavana. Our rituals, our puja is based on Shantideva's work. So it's Mahayana, from the Mahayana. And we also, at least at the level of ordination, we take on Tibetan practices, visualization practices from the Tibetan tradition. So all three yanas are included in this movement. And as I say, we don't regard ourselves as belonging to any particular traditional school of Buddhism. So along with the centrality of going for refuge, which Bhante has always very strongly emphasized, and which is seen as the real unifying factor of this movement, everybody, at least when they take ordination, regards their going for refuge as central, a central thing in their life. So it's not so matter, people live very diverse lifestyles within the Western Buddhist order. Some people live in monastic settings, have taken on brahmachari precepts, a celibate. Some people live with families, have children. Some people work, in the outside world. Other people work full-time for the FWBO or for the WBO. So there's no particular lifestyle required for ordination, but what is required is a strong commitment to practice and development. I will say a little bit about ordination in a minute. The other factor that Sangharakshita has emphasized very strongly, which I think is to some extent rather different from many Buddhist groups, is that he's put a very strong emphasis on the development of spiritual friendship. So though I regard Sangharakshita, who's my preceptor, he ordained me, I regard him as my teacher, in a way his relation to his disciples is not really one of a guru. He doesn't regard himself as a guru, and his disciples do not look upon him as a guru. What he's encouraged very much is for people to form very strong, lasting friendships among themselves. And this is really the central emphasis of the order. The order's been described as a network of spiritual friendships, and this is very much how we see it. The order has no legal existence, in fact. It is purely really based on individual connections between individual practitioners. It has no legal or organizational reality as such. And this emphasis is not only in the order, but it's within the FWBO, or Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, which is the organizational wing of the movement. And I want to say a little bit about how that's structured, because I also think this reflects quite a lot of Bhante's or Sangharakshita's thinking on this. I don't know how many centres we have now. There's a lot of centres, particularly in England and India, as I said, and also increasingly in other parts of the world, America, Australasia, all over really. And each centre, like this particular centre, is completely autonomous. It's organisationally autonomous. So there's no headquarters, there's no sort of central headquarters that are directing operations. Centres are set up by individuals, usually individual order members, though not necessarily people who have been ordained, that just freely choose to go somewhere. Like I freely chose to come to San Francisco and help set up a centre here. So individuals just set up centres. Centres are financially and organisationally, as I say, autonomous. There's no central organisation. The principle behind centres is that they should be run, and particularly the teaching should be done by the most experienced and committed people within that situation. So that's the basic principle. And the unity of the movement, the unity of the centres, is in the fact that all the centres, wherever they are, teach the same practices, and more importantly, it's again just the unity is ensured or based upon just individual connections between people. So, I have a lot of friends that are still in England. In a few weeks, I'll be going back to England for a couple of months to attend retreats and the Order Convention. And the whole basis of the movement really is on this principle of friendship rather than any formal organisational setup. Along with centres, the other two main institutions that we've used are what we call right livelihood businesses or cooperatives, and these opportunities are businesses set up by people within the movement, which create a context for people to work with other Buddhists in an ethical situation. And we've got a number of businesses that have now been very successful, particularly in England. businesses that provide support for the people, financial support for the people that work there, and also funding for various parts of the movement, retreat centres and such like. So my own experience, for example, is when I got involved in the FWBO in 1983, I think, and about a year after being involved, I decided that I wanted to leave my job, and I left the work I was doing, and I sold the house I was living in, and I moved into a Buddhist community, and I started to work in a Buddhist right livelihood. At that time it was a landscape garden business, commercial landscape garden business. And so what the movement tries to do is provide a context for people to be fully immersed in the Buddhist life, because this is what they want to do. So it tries to provide a context in which they can live and work and practice. So the other thing, along with centres and right livelihood businesses, are communities, and we encourage people to set up communities. There's no one model of a community. Most communities, but not all of them, are single sex, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. Some communities are what we call open communities, and other communities are more monastic in style, they're closed communities. And as I say, there's a whole variety of these communities. Now in San Francisco, I myself live above this building with two other Buddhists, and above us is a small women's community. And there's also other communities beginning to spring up around this centre. So communities are just individuals who decide that they want to live together in order that their practice is supported, that they're in a more supportive situation to practice. So these are the three main kind of institutions within the FWBO: public centres, right livelihood businesses, and communities. The other thing Sangha has emphasised, and there is an emphasis in this movement, is on single-sex activities. At an introductory level, all our activities are just mixed. If you come along to the centre here for a meditation class or a regulars class, it's just a mixed class. At a certain level, we try and provide opportunity for people to actually go on single-sex retreats. As I say, most of the communities are single-sex. And Bhante's emphasised this in line with his idea of spiritual friendship. He felt that a single-sex situation actually provides a better situation for people to develop deeper friendships. And so there's been a great emphasis again put on the development of male friendship for men and female friendship for females. And the ordination, as though it's exactly the same for men and women, is separate in that women's ordination process is administered and taught, like their preceptors. Bhante Sangha no longer ordains anybody. He's handed these responsibilities on to senior members in the order. And women will be ordained by other women, men will be ordained by men. And though we very much regard ourselves as a single order, much of the activities at that level will be single sex. Perhaps I'll just say a little bit about what it means to be ordained into the Western Buddhist order and how that happens. Again, there's no actual formal requirement to become ordained. When someone becomes along to a public centre to start with, they're just referred to and regarded as a friend, what we call a friend. Anybody that comes along, there's no formal membership. You can't join the FWBO. You can't, you don't pay an annual subscription and join. You just come along and you're regarded as a friend. At a certain point, if you want to deepen your involvement, your commitment, you can ask to be what is called a mitra. And mitra actually as some of you I'm sure know, comes from the word friend, actually. But you can formally ask to be a mitra, and a mitra is someone that's made a formal commitment. The commitment they make is to a regular meditation practice, to try and have a regular contact, develop friendships with order members, and it's a commitment to saying that they want to practice primarily within this context. Okay, so at a certain point you can ask to become a mitra, and if that's accepted, and that's decided by the local order chapter. The order's locally organised into what we call chapters. We meet once a week as a chapter, and it's a chapter that decides whether someone's ready to be a mitra. And if it's decided that you are ready, there's a very simple ceremony and you become a mitra. And at that point, on becoming a mitra, there's an organised formal study course that lasts for 3 years. There's also various retreats become available to you that aren't available at this mitra retreat, order mitra retreats. If after becoming a mitra you decide that you want to be ordained, you can just ask for ordination. And the process by which someone becomes ordained is rather a mysterious process in a sense. As I say, there's no formal requirements. It's really dependent on the order, just feeling at some point. It's very much a matter of feeling that someone is ready to join the order, which means that we're very confident that that person has made a very strong and lasting commitment to his or her going for refuge. This is what they want to do with their life, that they are what we call effectively going for refuge, and that this is going to deepen through their practice, practice of spiritual friendship, their practice of meditation, their study of the Dharma. This is going to deepen for the rest of their life. Normally these days, from asking to become a member of the order to actually becoming a member of the order, taking ordination, going for refuge, it probably takes on average something like probably about 10 years. So it's quite a lengthy process. It can be a lot quicker than that. It can take a few years. And it can be a lot longer than that. So it's not like you take exams or do anything like this. It really is a matter of just developing strong enough friendships with members of the order until they feel confident that your commitment is very secure. And the order now consists, I think, of something a little over 700 men and women. And it's very rare indeed these days for someone to drop away once you're ordained. It's very much seen as a lifelong commitment and taken very seriously. And it's very unusual now for someone to resign or drop out of contact. As an order member, there's no particular requirements. You don't have to do anything. It doesn't qualify you to teach. Some order members who feel that they want to teach will do training to learn to teach, and some will specialise in Dharma study, and there's a big emphasis put on Dharma study within this movement. Others will just carry on in their normal jobs and whatever, but their commitment is to the order. They were all required to be a member of a chapter. We meet at least once a week as an order in our local chapter. Less frequently here, but in England you would attend what's known as a regional order meeting every month for a weekend, and a national order meeting every 2 months. Here it's a little bit different because there's just about 20 order members in America and we're scattered across the country, so we don't get together so much. Okay, well maybe I'll just leave it at that and see what questions you've got. I mean, it's I'm trying to cover really a rather broad there's a lot more I could say, but I have a broad area, and it might be more interesting if you just ask me specific questions and things that interest you rather than me just going on. So I'll just open it for questions and see if you'd like to ask.
Let me start with our why we came here. We were hunting around for space and got a lot of no's, and then we got your invitation to consider coming here. So that was very impressive. We liked the idea that you came to us and said, look, you might be comfortable here. Could you comment a little bit more on the Order's relationship to gay issues or gay culture, whatever you want to call it, in England maybe, or why you thought we were particularly compatible?
Sure, yeah, I can try and say something. In England in particular, I think the Order's been very active and very successfully so within the gay community, and it's done this not as a matter of policy. As I say, it's a bit hard to explain, but actually there isn't, as with most things, we don't have a stated policy. It's done purely out of the interests of particular Order members, and because there was quite a few gay Order members, particularly in London, that they decided that they wanted to act. I suppose about 15 years ago, they started outreach, very deliberately setting up courses, retreats, classes for gay men and some of the women for gay women, and it's been a very important and part of the movement. I don't have statistics, but certainly there's a disproportionate, I would say, number of gay men and gay women involved in this movement in England because of those policies. It's proved very, had a very big impact on the gay community in London, and we're very happy that's been the case. Banty's own attitude towards it's always been unequivocally that, how I'm supposed to put it, he's never felt that being gay or he's never seen it as an impediment to one's spiritual development, and he's always very much encouraged us to go out to the gay community, and so we're here, having come to San Francisco and having that as part of the background of the movement in England. We very much would like. It so happens, it's a slightly unfortunate way, it so happens that myself and the other two Order members in San Francisco are both heterosexual, So I wouldn't personally feel comfortable, running courses for gay men. I don't feel that's appropriate, but I certainly would like to have, encourage that, and hopefully, as time goes on, we will have gay Order members in this situation, and once we've got that, I think we'll be a lot more active. So inviting you here was very much with that in mind, that we very much wanted to be involved in whatever way we could with the gay community in San Francisco. So it was very deliberate. Don't know if that answers your question.
No.
You said that ordination is a process that takes about 10 years in average path. And you said all the centers are autonomous. So does that mean, is there some kind of line of Dharma transmission that is required for ordination? Is everybody ordained by someone who has a direct connection back to the founder, or is it does each autonomous community decide on its own who it wants to ordain?
It's a little hard to there's a distinction made between the FWBO, the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, which is like this centre is part of it, and it's got we're a non-profit registered, we've got we're a legal entity, okay, and there's a distinction made between that and the WBO, the Western Buddhist Order, and ordination is not really anything to do with the FWBO as such. So individual centres, it's a little bit complicated, but although individual order members in centres might be very intimately involved in that process, it's very much part of the Western Buddhist Order rather than the FWBO. So at the moment, up until I think 87, Sangharakshita personally ordained everybody, yeah. And after that, he started to appoint preceptors, public and private preceptors. So now there's 3 men and 3 women that do the ordinations. So and the ordination, it's got these 2 parts to it. You have a private ordination, so you have a private preceptor, who I suppose you have a personal teacher-disciple relationship with, which might or might not be the same as a public preceptor. He's someone that then ordains you into the actual order, as a representative of the order. So people say if someone here asks for ordination within the Western Buddhist Order, they wouldn't be ordained by anybody at this centre. Actually, all the preceptors are still either in India or England, actually. So what we do here is organise retreats for people that have asked for ordination. So we have what we call going for refuge retreats, which are just for men or women that have asked for ordination. And we have in America at the moment, we have a team of 4 order members from various centres in America that make up an ordination team. And then we have someone called Subhuti is actually the public preceptor for all American men. So he comes over twice a year and runs this retreat with the team here. So it's kind of separate from the FWBO, yeah. Although as an order member, I would have a lot to do with someone's ordination. And another thing that perhaps I haven't mentioned, which is worth mentioning, is that when someone's asked for ordination, they're encouraged to ask for what we call Kalyana Mitrata, which is in which they choose 2 order members in which to form particular friendships with. And there's a very simple ceremony in which this is, if those order members agree to become this person's Kalyana Mitra, there's a very simple ceremony which formalises this friendship as a formal declaration of friendship, which is then expected to last as long as those people live. I mean, it's a big commitment for all 3 people concerned, and much of the ordination process is actually based either on this official Kalyana Mitra or unofficial Kalyana Mitrata, where, it is very much based on people forming individual relationships with other ordermen. There's also I say there's no formal requirement. People are expected to have completed this 3-year study course, and people are expected to have quite good basic Dharma knowledge. They wouldn't be ordained without that, but just because they got that doesn't mean they'll be ordained. It's like that. So.
It's kind of very personal for me. A bell went off in my head when I heard that you have communities in which men only deal with men and women only deal with women. And to me, I thought, this is brahmacharya. It means that it's set up in order not to have relationships, sexual relationships. I'm saying this is what happened in my head. I'm not saying it's true. And therefore, I said, and what would it mean in a community of men that is gay, or what would a gay man do in a community of men?
There are in fact a number of gay communities in England. I'm not sure what they do. But I mean, I should say that, Sangharakshita has never really... he does encourage us towards brahmachari. He does, but he's also very, very careful about it. He suggested...
I know what brahmachari means.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, I suppose in a simplest way to say celibacy, a monarch, to take, so it's slightly different, but not to engage in any sexual activity, which is, all body, speech and mind, it's not just a physical thing. And although he encourages it, he's also very, very cautious about it. So someone who wants to take on brahmachari, which is not a separate ordination in this movement, you simply take it as a vow. Someone that wanted to do that would request it, and normally they'd be asked to live for at least a year as brahmachari before taking a formal vow. And so he takes it, if we do it, it's taken very seriously. And actually, the percentage of people that have formally taken on brahmachari within the movement is very small. It's probably, 5% of the order. And mostly older men or older women. Quite a few women, in their 60s, 70s. He's very reluctant for men under 40 to do it, actually. He rather discourages it, unless they're very sure that they want to do it. And so though he sees it as something which we should move towards, in that he says that, there is a feeling that because our going for refuge is seen as so central, that our sexual activities shouldn't be central to our lives. Our lives aren't centrally based upon a relationship. He doesn't. He has, maybe rather controversial in some circles. He has said that he doesn't particularly encourage us to be monogamous. So he said very clearly that a monogamous relationship can be just as unethical as any other sort of. He doesn't say, well, that's necessarily the best way. It's necessarily best to be in a stable monogamous relationship. What he has emphasised is that one should try and be ethical within one's sexual activity. But he certainly very strongly has said that he certainly doesn't believe that heterosexual relationships are inherently any more skillful or unskillful than any homosexual relationships. And you could even say to some extent, although I say this rather cautiously, that to some extent he rather favours homosexual relationships over, if we're going to be sexually active. Not that he would if it wasn't your inclination, but if it was your inclination, he has suggested that perhaps they can be, and I don't know, but perhaps they can be a little less unskillful. But you'll probably know better than me. I don't know.
Can you say something about the meditation practice, like what happens on a retreat?
Sure, yeah. There's been a big emphasis trying to teach meditation very clearly. I mean, the two, as I say, initially, the practices that we emphasise, the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana. There's all sorts of
What was the third one?
The mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana, development of loving kindness, are the two practices we emphasise. There's all sorts of retreats actually. There's retreats with not quite so much variety in America, but in England there's different types of retreat centres. So some of the centres emphasise Dharma study rather than meditation. Some emphasise meditation, so you would go and it would be a silent retreat. You'd be doing a lot of meditation. Other retreats would be a lot more kind of mixed, where you do a certain amount of meditation, a certain amount of study, a certain amount of just free time to hang out with people. So there's actually a big variety of the types of retreats that we do, depending on people's level of experience. So, we do try, as I say, we do try and teach meditation very thoroughly to people. We put a big emphasis on people really learning the basics of meditation and working with those meditations for a long time. In fact, it's only at the point of ordination that we take up different practices. So at the point of ordination, people take up a visualization practice from Tibetan tradition, but before that we are doing mindfulness of breathing, basically metta bhavana, the two practices, the main practices that we do. Yeah. He has Sangharakshita, his sort of thinking on meditation is that people need to develop a strong samatha practice, that they really need to be grounded and fairly psychically integrated, I suppose, before they take on more direct insight practices. So he's made this traditional distinction between samatha and vipassana practice, and we do emphasize the samatha aspect of meditation quite heavily for most people for quite a few years. So that's the sort of general approach, I think.
Well, thank you for coming.
Well, it's my pleasure, yeah. It's very nice to speak to you.
It's good to know more about the world.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.